Hi, you're welcome to the video on project management. My name is Emeka Ogey. I'm one of the partners at Wits and Strat Media, and I've been doing this for well over 10 years. My everyday involves managing projects in design, branding, and corporate communications. I get to manage experts and professionals across different geographical locations and across different walks of life. So what it means is that my day-to-day involves project management. I feel very honored to be bringing you this class or this workshop on effective project management, strategies for successful execution. That's the topic. You'll agree with me that every project rises and falls on execution. What that means is that if you execute poorly, you have a very poor project. If you execute above average, you have an outstanding project. No doubt that execution sits at the heart of successful project management. I'd like to make two assumptions at the beginning of this class. First is that there are two types of people watching this video. First would be who I'd like us to call career project managers, people who manage projects professionally. And the second group or type of people will be everyday project managers. You always have something to do, you always have a project, and that's why you're watching this video. Another assumption is that we all want to get better, and that's why you're watching this. You want to be able to complete your projects within budget, on time, and above expectation. That's why you're watching this video. Whichever class or whichever group you belong to, I would like to say to you that we have something in common. We all want to get better. So in this video, I'm going to make sure there are no jargons. I'll make sure it's not as academic a video on project management, that we stay around the strategies for execution and it's beneficial to everybody, career project managers or everyday project managers. We're surrounded by projects. You are either at the beginning of a project right now, in the middle of one, in the midst of one, or just concluding a project. So what is a project? I'll give you a fraction of a minute to think about what a project is. Now, if your definition says that a project is temporary, then you are right. Projects are never forever. A project always has a beginning and an end. A project is a unique endeavor, it's a set of tasks or set of activities that are commissioned towards a set goal or objectives. So projects are not the same as your regular operations. So if you're trying to get a new or get a certification, if you're trying to set up a new office or a new outlet or another outlet, you are planning your wedding, whatever that project is, it's finite. It has a beginning and it has an end, and it's a unique endeavor. It's not like everything else you're doing. So it's in company speaks. It's different from your operations. And then a project is always towards a predetermined set of objectives or goals. And projects involve walking through the maze of constraints in terms of limitations in resources, limitations in time, limitations in expertise or in staffing. That's what a project is basically, so that we don't go into the jargons of defining what a project is. So in effect, project management is managing other people's work, managing teams. It involves people. Project management is, we could say, project management is the management of other people's work or management of a team towards a set of objectives that have been predetermined through constraints. What are the possible constraints? Constraints are limitations in the availability or supply or access to resources, human resource, material resource, processes. Those are limitations or constraints in project management. Now, regardless of the kind of project that you're managing, be it personal, organizational, states, whatever type of project, they have similar life cycles in that every project must have a beginning and an end. Every project starts somewhere and ends somewhere. If it doesn't end, if it is forever, then we can't call it a project. If it doesn't involve people as well, then we can't call it a project, right? It must involve you and other people. Now, project management Um, every project has a life cycle. It starts somewhere and it ends somewhere. And at the beginning of every project is ideation, is initiation. After initiation is planning. After planning is execution, which is the core of every project. It is the longest aspect of any project. Most times it's the most difficult because that is when you begin to deal with other people and manage other people. That is when the rubber hits the road. And that's what we're talking about today specifically, but we'll come to that. After execution, you have to monitor, you have to assess, you have to review. That's the next phase. So first of all, let's go over it again. First of all is initiation of the project. Second is planning. Third is execution. Fourth is monitoring and assessment, as the case may be. And then fifth is closure of the project. Career project managers know what I'm talking about. We might have different words for it, but we'll agree on this, that regardless of the type of project, it follows similar sequence. So there's a tally, there are similarities in the cycle of these projects. Today we're going to be talking specifically about execution. Execution sits at the center and at the core of project management. If you're watching me today, you realize that most times you've planned a project, you've made it up in your head, and it seems like a good one. You've already won, and then when you hit the road, things begin to happen, and then the project either becomes tiring, becomes difficult, or becomes aborted. That tells you that execution is at the core, is at the heart of project management. Now let's move on. I want to talk about 6 pillars of execution. So today in this class, I want to talk about 6 pillars of project execution. I'll list them and then we'll go over them one after the other. First is start with why. Second is consult well. Third is win on paper. Fourth is build an army, build a team. Fifth is communication. And sixth is failing forward, contingency. So let's start from the top. Start with why. The first pillar of successful project execution is starting with why. Your why is your business case, as I said in corporate speaks. Your why is your project charter. Your why is your project brief. Most times, when projects fall behind schedule, go above budget, or under expectation, it's because the why has eluded either the team or other stakeholders, or it has not been properly articulated. What I'll say to you is this: are there possibilities that one of the reasons why you might struggle with your project once in a while is because the why hasn't been articulated properly or even properly understood if it was tried, if it had been attempted to be articulated? The why of a project is so important that it is the motivation for your team when the chips are down. The why of your project is so important that that is what makes it fulfilling in the end. It is a measure of fulfillment. It's a center point for reference in the good times and in the bad times of your project. Starting with why is non-negotiable. So if you're listening to me as a project manager, whether it's your individual project or it's a group project or you do it professionally, the whys of your project. I know this is not how we would say it in project management, but the why of a project is non-negotiable because that is the source of truth, because that is the source of vision. And if the vision of that project isn't clear, if the purpose for which that project exists is not clear or it has expired, you find out that more money is spent on it than required or than is necessary, or more time, or regardless of how much completion or how quickly it was completed, it will always be below expectation. Because the why of your project is at the core of fulfillment, it's at the core of motivation, it's at the core of success. If you don't know the why of your project, which I hope that's not the case, or if the why of a project is not properly communicated, not properly articulated, or it's not been put down in a way that is measurable, specifications are not clear, then that project suffers. Now, let's give a practical example. If you're working on getting a certification, it's very important that the reason, your personal reason why you want to get the certification, that it's very clear and that everybody involved understands the reason why you want to get the certification. Let's say you work somewhere you have a boss or you have a partner, and you're trying to get a certification. If the reason why you want to get a certification first hasn't been understood, first by you and then by the people around you, they will not give you the kind of support you need. Sometimes you will you might not be able to prioritize in order to be successful on that project. You find out that there are possibilities you struggle more because the reason why, the purpose for that project is either misunderstood or not understood enough. The second pillar for successful project execution is consultation, consulting well. And to consult well, you have to know your stakeholders. Every project has stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are anybody or group of people who have interests in any project. Interest in terms of input, that would be your team, your partners, your vendors, and everybody working with you, the experts working with you in that on that project. Or in terms of output, who will be the beneficiaries or your customer or the project owner, whatever the case is. But you have to know these people. You have to know what they need, and you have to consult with them. The possibilities that one of the reasons why your project sometimes suffers is because you don't ask questions. You don't get the buy-in because you don't ask questions. Buy-in is your stakeholders giving you their support. It's your stakeholders giving you perspective for your project or context for your project. Consulting well is non-negotiable. And getting buy-in is non-negotiable if you want to be successful on your project, whether it is personal or for your organization. Desire is not enough. You have to do your feasibility, and that is part of consulting. You have to do a needs assessment. You have to be able to ask questions. You have to be able to gather expectations and see how related they are. I'll give you an example. If you're working on a project and let's say it's a not-for-profit project. You want to give out notebooks and laptops to kids in a school, and you 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 have the money for it, you have the means for it, but you have not consulted properly with the school you are giving it to. You can buy laptops for them, you can send them books, you can do whatever you want for them. One piece of information that a question earlier asked and answers earlier gotten could have given you can save the day. If you did not know that this school didn't have electricity, it could undermine your project. It could undermine your gifts. Right? I'm trying to use everyday examples. Let's say you're a photographer, a wedding photographer, and you have an event this weekend. So you've been paid, you've finalized on the arrangement, and your stakeholders are the couple that have engaged you, um, the family members and friends who are co celebrants, and they have expectations of the photographer. They have an idea, different ideas of what the pictures should look like. Other stakeholders would be maybe your assistants, people on your team, or other photographers you are collaborating with to make the delivery. You see how the stakeholder mapping is broadening the more you think about the project, the more you think about what you want to do. Now, consulting well in this instance would mean getting on the phone to speak with the bride and the groom, asking them what their expectations are, because you need multiple points of view. You don't want to think that you know what to do, because as a project manager, you rarely ever know what to do alone. You consult. Are there possibilities that on your projects, one of the reasons why the money is never enough or time is never enough, or why you are either never satisfied, or your project owner or your customers are always underwhelmed, it's because you don't ask the right questions, because you don't even ask at all, because you don't get buy-in. And the purpose of asking these questions is to know, is to be able to get into their heads and to be able to ask questions, to be able to get answers, to be able to model your delivery to suit the questions they are asking, to model your delivery to be able to meet the expectations that you were supposed to have gotten from asking questions. You see the point I'm making? So consulting well is a pillar. It's a non-negotiable pillar for successful project execution. The third pillar of project execution, successful one at that, is planning, and planning well. We could say that planning is winning on paper, and paper in this instance will mean anything you can communicate with. There has to be proof that you have sat down to think through the processes, the material requirements in terms of budgeting, the non-material requirements in terms of expertise, the people you would work with on that project, and then the processes. There has to be proof that you've thought about it and that you've thought through it. There has to be a provision for eventualities in your plan. So the plan for any project is its blueprint. Now, in order not to be very, very complex with this, let's go back to the instance we've been working with of the photographer. The photographer going for a wedding this Saturday, the wedding photographer, has to have a plan. If his partners or his fellow photographers say to him, "When are we leaving?" he has to be able to communicate that. If they say, how much are we getting?" he has to be able to communicate that. If they say, whatever question they ask, their level of involvement, their motivation to get involved in that project or to deliver on that project, most times will be determined by how clear the plan is. And the clarity of that plan is measured by how easily communicated that plan is. So, planning in any project and planning well in any project is non negotiable. So, are there possibilities that your projects going on from here can get better if you attributed more time and resources to planning? Don't overlook planning, because if you win in planning, most times you win in execution. There's always a relationship between projects that go very well and plans that have been done very well. When you plan very well, or when you have a very good plan, you are able to save more. When you have a very good plan, you're able to motivate your team because there's a point of reference. You're able to communicate properly to your team. You're able to assess properly. You're able to also detect potential risk to your project. These are many, many reasons. There's so many reasons why planning is non-negotiable, and not just planning, but planning well. That brings me to our next pillar: build an army. An army in this instance is your team, and you are only as formidable as your team. Most projects that are ailing do so because they are either short staffed, improperly staffed in terms of the feat of the expertise and knowledge, or because the load in the project is not evenly or properly distributed. So, what I want to say to you today is that in planning your project, you want to be very deliberate about who does it with you. You want to be very deliberate about who's on your team. And how do you do that? You want to start first with what the needs, what the knowledge or expertise or professional needs of that project, what they are. So I give an instance, or let's go back to the instance of the photographer. Photographer knows that the reason he might have been engaged is because of the quality of his work. So he wants to be able to break down all of the human input into the delivery of for that project. So who helps him with his lighting, who helps him with his costume if that's necessary, who helps him get there, who drives him there, and you know, we could go on and on about all of the people who work with him on that project. But these are the people who form his team. This is his army. He will never be able to win fighting alone. So your team is non-negotiable. That's your army. To fight and to win, You want to be able to build, maintain, and motivate perpetually a formidable team. That's why there's no I in team. It's TEAM. There's no I. You cannot personally win every time. It is the reason why my suggestion to you, if you really, really want to be successful at executing projects, is to always work with teams. With your team, you can share losses and you can share the glory of having aced projects. With your team, you can collaborate on views, you can collaborate on strengths, you can cover each other's weaknesses. I think these are things we hear every day. But my suggestion to you is to take it seriously and to see that this might be one of the areas where your projects suffer and why you're watching this video. The fifth pillar of execution in project management is communication. Communication, just like in every other aspect of life, in project management, is the lifeline. It is the blood, it is the glue that holds everything together. And communication, or poor communication rather, is said to be the cause of more than 90% of project failures. Because communication is how the team is kept abreast with its performance. Communication is how the team is made to run with a vision or with the goal of the project. Communication is indispensable. It's non-negotiable. So our first question here is, what do you communicate? You communicate the objectives or the vision or the goals. You communicate deadlines. You communicate a budget. You communicate any and everything that needs to be transferred from one person's head or mind to another person. And this can be done in person, virtually, via documents, spoken word, whichever way. But communication is non-negotiable. And in my experience of project management, I realized that effective communicators are very good listeners. So the first point on communication I want to tell you or give to you is to listen more. Are there possibilities that if you listen more on your projects, you'd be able to understand better, faster, and more effectively? And it is on that basis that your projects will get better. Are there possibilities that if you listen more, you'll be able to speak in the language that you have heard from your stakeholders or from your team members? So listening is non-negotiable. It's a type of communication. Now, another thing about communication in project management is that there has to be an established chain of command. There has to be an established process for communication. It is the reason why there are always communication plans. What's a communication plan? A communication plan details how, what, how frequently, in terms of how often, and the goal of every communication task. That's what a communication plan does. But in a simpler way, communicating as a project manager is about making sure that there are no dark areas in your project. Is making sure that there are no uncertain areas in your project. And the less uncertainties there are, the less confusions there are, the less guesses there are in your project, the more successful it will be. Communication, good communication in a project encourages accountability. If the members of your team or your stakeholders or the owners of your project are unable to take or give bad or unpleasant information as much as they would take or give good ones, then there's a problem. So, as a project manager, prioritizing not just communication but quality communication in your project could be the difference between what you used to do and what you would like to do. This brings us to our last pillar. The last pillar is contingency. Let's call it failing forward. Contingency could be the unforeseen or the contingency. I take it again. Contingency could be unforeseen circumstances, it could be exigencies, it could be curveballs, it could be things you didn't plan for. And a lot of times in project planning, even in simple project planning, like our photographer, there are things you don't plan for, or there are things you don't plan enough for. No matter how much you have planned for the rain, you can only plan for what you can do about the rain if it rains on set. But you can't effectively determine how the other people on set will react or how it will impact on them. So you can't sufficiently know what will happen. That's where contingencies come in. You want to have a plan when things go wrong, and things always go wrong. And your plan should involve what you would do if things go wrong. Your plan should involve what everybody should do or shouldn't do when things go wrong. And you also want to be flexible. Flexibility when things go wrong is very important. Project management requires that the project manager anticipates everything that could go wrong while hoping that things stay on track and things go properly. But what it means is that the attitude or the perspective of the project manager, that's you, towards things not going right or things falling through totally, that's failure. It's critical. It's important that as a project manager, when things don't go the way you plan, you don't throw your hands in the air and give up. You don't throw your hands in the air and start blaming. You don't throw your hands in the air and sacrifice the entire project. Your ability to respond to unforeseen circumstances is a factor of how prepared you are for it. So, what I want to say to you with this last point is that you have to feed your hope that your project, and how you do that is with a good plan. How you do that is with proper communication, is with a good team, all of the things we've said. But you also want to be able to practice a bounce back from failure. You also want to be able to practice preparedness, that failure will be part of the process to success in project management. So let's go over what we have learned today. We started first with saying you have to always start with why. You have to always start with the end in mind. But the reason why you have that end in mind is more important most times than that end itself. Secondly, we talked about consulting well. We talked about knowing your stakeholders. We talked about knowing what they want. We talked about conferring with them and making sure that you get their buy-in. We talked about winning on paper, how planning is at the center of any successful execution. I mean, good planning. We also talked about building an army, how you have to build a team, how you have to also depend on a team, because your dependence on a team makes you work at your best. Your dependence on a team makes you perform at your best because everybody on the team brings in their best. Everybody on the team shares the glory of winning just as much as they would share the pain or the responsibility of losses. How you uphold harmony as a project manager. We also talked about communication, how communication is the lifeline and the blood of any project. And lastly, we talked about contingencies, planning for contingencies, how that things might and may and always things go wrong, but how you have to bounce back and come back from failure and make sure that your team is organized around adjusting very quickly, being flexible when things don't go as planned. So that's what we've learned today. My hope is that with all you've learned, that you put it to practice, that you don't hold back, whether as a career project manager, as a professional project manager, or an everyday project manager, that you practice what we've just learned. And I'm certain that if you do, you reap the benefits, both as an individual and as an organization and our country at large. Thank you very much.